And before we do that, thanks for doing that. I was just going to get everyone's permission to record.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, no objections? Awesome. So can we have the board minutes up, please, just to take a quick scroll and a motion to approve the board minutes?
Can you scroll down a bit? Thanks. I just want to see the action items.
Yes, thanks for mentioning that, because we will go over the action items in a brief second, actually, after the approval.
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Can I have someone second it, please?
I can second it.
I'll second it.
Okay, and who seconded, who actually,
That was Alteria with the second.
okay, Altera, thank you, because that we'll need to have that in the minutes as well. Thank you very much. All right, so the minutes have been approved. So now let's go into the actual action items of the minutes from the last meeting. Stephanie, we talked about a presentation on leadership and teacher turnover. Do we have that for today?
Not Rebecca. I do have to report out about the enrollment task force in our first meeting, but we do not have that information for today.
So the enrollment task force has been created.
Recording in progress.
Okay, okay. So do you mind giving us an update on the task force and any updates on any staff development and the compliance around that?
In terms of the task force, we met for the first time on the 11th, and basically we talked about what our objectives are, which you have identified here about the leadership turnover, the teacher turnover, and getting into the deeper why. And we came up with some ideas and some platforms and how to approach it, but that's as far as we got from our first meeting.
Okay, do you mind just giving us one tangible idea that you came up with?
Absolutely. So we want, and just to give you an idea who was a part of that task force, Dr. O, who's on our board, was a vital part of that meeting, the school leaders, enrollment specialists, and both me and Travis. And one of the ideas that came out of that was using this as not just a way to find out the why, but also using it as an opportunity to rebrand and to reconnect with viable stakeholders in the community, looking for ways to use that historical value, historical context and content to again rebrand and to kind of understand the why. So the next steps are working with EdOps to get our historical contacts, create a survey and a platform, and to consult with our IT on how we could use some additional web space for the campaign and the rebranding, in addition to finding out the why.
Okay. And what about the staff development on compliance requirements?
Staff requirements on compliance requirements. Can you expand a little bit on that? I don't think I quite understand the question or where that is in our action item, and I do apologize.
Okay. Orinthia, do you want to speak to that a little bit, please?
So basically, what was the professional development that was going to be had in order to make sure staff is in compliance? So if you look at, scroll down a little bit. So stop. So the enrollment task force also was, in addition, was supposed to be looking at is staff in compliance, as well as to look at basically with the turnover and how that kind of is leading to or has led to the turnover. So looking at what ways in which we're making sure that staff is in compliance with.
Okay, I see that that's noted as a part of the annual audit. because there were some deficiencies that were in the annual audit that were related to turnover, specifically around the procurement matter. We had committed by January 31st, providing training, update, and feedback on those major components. So I do have that mentioned in part of my presentation.
Yeah, and I think it was just what the professional development was going to be. But if you're going to present on that, then that's kind of what I meant.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, are there any growth-oriented strategies that have been implemented for classroom teachers?
Yes. Well, first of all, good evening. So instructional practices, we're looking at, we're actually taking a step backwards and taking a look at planning and answering a question about, does planning actually connect with in-class instruction? And this is based on both the Rise Up work and the work that the AEC did during the month of January. We really want to make sure the teachers are doing exactly what they say they're doing in their planning. And if they're making adjustments, what is it based off of, and why are they making these adjustments? Both campuses just completed the Winter Star administration, and the data hasn't been released yet because it needs to be verified. So we're working with both enrollment specialists to make sure students are coded correctly in PowerSchool so that the STAR data is accurate. With the Academic Excellence Committee, I just mentioned that, they met in January, and it sort of overlapped with what the work that we're doing with the Rise Up team. And in February, the Rise Up team and the schools are going to be taking a deeper dive into planning, both looking at planning sessions and also giving feedback to teachers on their planning protocols, so that when we go into classrooms to do observations, we can connect the planning to the work, and then also to the STAR data to see if there's a trend between the three. And
Okay, so, no, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
No, continue. I thought you were done.
No, and so the last bullet on the next steps was, academic support team, including the EVP. We will continue to update and use the progress monitoring tool, not only on a monthly basis, but we're still incorporating it into the weekly conversations, both with myself and both school leaders, as well as each school's individual task forces, so that it becomes a constant update, not just an act of compliance.
So would you be able to show us, the update on the actual monitoring tool at some point?
Yeah. Well, I do have some screenshots for tonight. I'm not on the agenda, but I do have a presentation if time allows to show those screenshots.
Okay, and if not this month, then next month. Thanks for the update on that.
Absolutely.
And I know the other work on how feedback is given in writing is still ongoing with the academic monitoring, Academic Excellence Committee. All right, so Ms. Allen?
Yes.
Do you have any updates for us today? Screenshots,
Good
slides
evening.
on the students?
Yes, I do. So
Thank you.
both action items that were suggested, I have data on the fall. I have data on the fall, mid, and winter data for the SPED students, as well as an update on the work packets.
Okay. Thank you. So actually, if you don't mind, you can go ahead and share that with us now.
Okay. Okay. Back. So the two action items that were on my plate. Oops, what happened?
We can still see the screen.
You can see? I can't
Yep,
see it though.
We can see it. Mm-hmm.
No, I cannot see. Hold on for a minute. Okay. So the two action steps that were on my screen were to bring forth the information for the data for the special education students, and that data is, it's not moving, is here. So what we noticed was As far as trends are concerned, the urgent intervention children, the numbers actually decreased, and there were more children who moved towards intervention. And we believe that the RTI collaboration that we have on both campuses and the LEA collaboration, we meet twice a month for the entire LEA. And we actually take a deep dive into data to see where the needs are for the students. And then we plan accordingly to moving children towards tier 2 RTI supports. We also noticed that, and this is for math that's presently showing, we also noticed that for 4-watch and for benchmark, those children didn't move at all, but there was a small margin of growth, very, very small, less than 1%. But for advanced students, for the advanced students, for mathematics, that did show. In the area of reading, urgent intervention, it actually increased a little for the Towson campus. And we believe that trend was due to the truancy rate, as the attendance rate rose a little bit. But we also noticed that there was a vast increase for the advanced students for the winter months, as those scores did show a lot of growth for Towson as well as Lamont. And then,
Okay.
oops, I'm sorry. Can I keep going, or you need me to stop?
No, I think that's just an interruption from
Okay.
another source. Please
So
continue.
then when it comes to the work packets, for Towson, we did, for the 2 students that were at Towson, we did make accommodations for those parents to come and pick up work packets on the 21st of January, as well as workbooks and other materials for learning. And then at at Lamont, we did a survey with the parents, and I jumped into their link during this session and met with the parents in a breakout room just to ascertain whether or not they wanted the work packets and if it was feasible for them to have them, because it would be requiring them to actually do more support at home for the students. And there actually was 5 parents that said yes. And it was only 1 parent that did not respond. And then it was 4 parents that said yes, 1 declined, and she said she had enough for her child with the in-person learning. And then 1 parent did not respond, but we reached out via email and phone call as well. The social worker for Lamont also reached out, and the teacher reached out several times. And then as far as RTI is concerned, with support to the learning loss, our next steps, we did, with our deep dive with the LEA, we did determine that there was 13.3% of the students who need some intense support. It equates to about 10 children. So they have already moved to tier 2 of RTI. And then that's it for that portion. The rest is new.
Okay. Well, you can just continue and
Okay.
share everything. Yeah. Since
Okay,
we're
thank you.
after this, we're not going back to SPED.
Okay, thank you. So with our ECE children, our preschool 3 and preschool 4 children, they took a test called an assessment called ASQ, and there was more than 89% children who were proficient overall. And within the parentheses are the percentages, and each domain, a child could go from 0% to 60%, which is 100% compliance. And the domains were communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving, and personal social. What we noticed in the trends for the children, For the preschool 3 and 4 children, the trends were the communication areas. That was one of the hardest domains for the children, and that was attributed to our Latinx families or our ELL families, and that's due to the ability for them to understand the English language. So what we did was we held a conference call meeting via Zoom, and the related service providers and the classroom teachers and the literacy coaches sat in on those meetings so that they could plan for different activities for those children to move forward and show more growth. Then when it came to our preschool 4 children, pretty much the same. The growth was very great. However, the communication was an issue, and it still was that same cohort of children, our Latinx families. And again, support was brought to a Zoom. They actually sat with the related service providers and planned activities for at home as well as teachers in school. Kindergarten, those children actually performed the best, and I think it's because they were actually students in preschool and preschool 3 and preschool 4 prior to kindergarten at the LEA. So they have had plenty of time to learn how to function in all of these domains and to have a lot of activities presented to them and extra supports outside of school with the families, and the families were very participatory in supporting them. So their growth was evident. And the trends, again, a lot of the low scores also were attributed to some children who were actually truant or having communication disorders, and those were our Latinx or ELL families. And that attributed to about 2 to 3 families per the LEA. So overall, our preschool kids, they averaged 87.22%. Preschool 4 averaged 88% overall, and kindergarten was 93% overall growth. And then our next steps for our children that are in tier 1, they will continue on tier 1. And for the LEA, that's 86.5% total. And we will continue to manage those children. The response to intervention managers that are located at both campuses are responsible for checking in with their teams. And then as a broader meeting, when we come to the LEA as a cohort to meet, then we review the data from the managers and we determine what the next steps are for those children. For our at-risk students, that's the percentage that I stated will be going to our tier 2. They will actually receive one-to-one small instruction or small group instruction, and those that service delivery will be either through synchronous or asynchronous support. Who is responsible? Our RTI collaborative will be responsible for making sure that every 2 weeks, those children are reassessed. Their scores are brought to the RTI LEA as a collaborative, and then we can measure their growth and determine if those children remain in tier 2 services or they actually are sent to the MDT for referral. Our critical babies, those babies are that very low percentage, and it was 2 to 3 per LEA. Those children actually are being monitored, screened, and 2 have already been referred. One that was referred was found not to have a disability. However, he just needs additional support with ELL supports. And then as far as our stats for special ed, currently all of our eligibilities are on time and our IEPs are on time as well. We still have 10% of the total population to complete for this year. And then next steps for February is just to basically bring forth the information from the RTI Collaborative. And then the RTI LEA Collaborative is the responsible party to bring that information, which it comes to me. And then we will just report out on any additional data that's coming from winter data. And again, that's my responsibility. And that's it for me. Are there any
Thank you.
questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Okay. So just keeping on with the agenda, I know we have facilities wasn't explicitly stated as an old business item, but after Stephanie gives her updates, we'll just kind of have Mr. Miller share his updates, hopefully within that same time frame, just to be, you know, to keep with time. And also considering that we are looking into reopening, I suppose, in February. Not sure if anything has changed, but that was the last conversation we had at the board meeting. So if there are any updates on that, that'll be helpful to know as well. And later on, I'll have our attorney also share some updates on the lease as well. So over to you, Stephanie.
All right, thank you very much. I will make this as brief and informative as possible. I'll start with the financial updates. And I would like to indicate that the Finance Committee did meet on Tuesday, so the details of the financial perspective of the LEA were shared with the Finance Committee prior to this meeting. Starting with our financial statement audit ending 6/30/2020, which was our most recent audit, I do want to report out that Imagine was responsible for reimbursing the LEA for the first half of the 2019 property tax, which was a result of a failure to file the rebate application. So that $191,000 has been reimbursed to the LEA. I also want to indicate that the completion of the 990 has occurred. It has been filed, and that completes the outstanding items for the financial statement audit in the 990 for the period ending 6/30/2020. Also a part of that, the part of the 990 completion was the question of how Imagine determines his salaries and compensations. So as a part of the audit, we're taking a look at the compensation policy and structure. We had an initial meeting, we're calling this kind of the compensation review committee. We had an initial meeting on January 8th with one of our board member, Carrie Smith, Tina Chavis Johnson from HR, and myself. We looked at establishing a compensation philosophy, policy, and the scale or schedule for which we will base compensation, to also address base salary, stipends, and bonuses. With the philosophy and policy, we expect to report out to the board with the draft on Monday, February 1st. The action item does indicate January 31st, but that is on a Sunday. So I respectfully ask for the board to expect that on Monday, February 1st. And we expect that the scale will require just a little more work, as that typically is where a bulk of the work and effort would be required. Moving over to our financial overview for December 2020. We started the year budgeting for $16 million operating budget, which was based on 144 students. 701 students for enrollment. I know that we've heard this over and over again, but we did not meet our student enrollment. So we are 144 shy of our targeted goal. So we're forecasting a revenue of $13 million. We were also budgeting for $18 million spent in expenses, but because of our budget shortfall, we have made some necessary reductions to align that spend more to $15 million. So that would result in a net loss of $2 million, which is almost $800,000 above the net loss that we were budgeting for at 1.2 million. For the month of December, the major changes in our forecast have been driven by savings in our direct student expenses, rent, the reimbursement for the property taxes, a reduction in salaries, and also a reduction in office expenses. So we are expecting to experience an increase in our cash flow at the end of the year. We are now projecting that we will have at least 94 days of cash on hand at year's end. It would still put us 780,000 below what we were initially budgeting. This here just provides a annotated view of the financial perspective for the LEA, both from an annual perspective and from a year-to-date forecast. Moving on to the enrollment data. What I have to present today around enrollment just reflects on what our withdrawals look like at this time, in addition to, in comparison to enrollment. At Lamont, we were projecting 238. We ended with 201 audited. We are currently at 198 for active enrollment at Lamont. For Towson, we were projecting for 463. Our audited numbers came in at 365. And we are currently at 361 for enrollment at Towson. In terms of withdrawals, again, we're at 201 for enrollment. We had 9 withdrawals from Lamont since school started. 3 of those for post-audit and 6 of those for pre-audit. The breakdown of those withdrawals, as you can see, the highest level of withdrawals from Lamont were in our pre-K. Of those 9, there were 3 students who withdrew, followed by our kindergartners with 2. For Towson, we experienced 22 withdrawals since school started. All of those were pre-audit. Towson's audit was extended to December, so these do span from August up to December with the 22 withdrawals at Towson. Broken down in terms of grade band, our highest area for withdrawals from Towson during the school year has been in our kindergarten classes, which is equates to 5 students. Understanding the why, we do, or we have been reflecting on looking at that 10-year span and seeing exactly the decline in enrollment. And from the last board meeting, it was suggested that we develop an enrollment task force. So again, earlier, I did present that we did meet on January 11th and who our participants were, and what we'll be focusing on are the trends and finding out the reasons for the leadership turnover, teacher turnover, the student decline, and grades in which these withdrawals were most commonly occurred. Again, some of the suggestions that came out of our meeting was understanding the story of each campus, understanding the competition and demographics, and using this as an opportunity to rebrand. Moving on to our operations update. As Rebecca's indicated, we are exploring reentry for in-person instruction. That plan is actively in progress. Prior to announcing any formal dates or any structured plans, we are planning up to February the 8th to offer a soft reopen. The purpose of this soft reopen will be to follow up with our staff, our scholars, and our families to showcase our building readiness and preparedness. And Dave will go into a little bit more of that as a part of his presentation. Obviously, with safety first has been our primary measure in terms of getting students back in school in person. We are keeping track of the $10 million grant that is that the mayor's office has presented to support public charter schools and their reopening efforts. That grant does require, in order to apply for the Tier 1 funding, that we offer 4 days of in-person instruction. We are also keeping our eyes open for the vaccination updates. That is fluid. It's changing every day. The DC Alliance has been communicating to us the first priority is to have those schools that are offering in-person instruction as soon as February will be given that priority. So we are working on getting our list over to the DC Alliance. We need to issue our parent surveys or reissue our parent surveys because the initial surveys that we issued to gauge our parent receptiveness to getting back in person, we only got 30% participation, and we do feel like we need additional participation. And we also need to issue additional surveys to our staff so we can understand the capacity that we have for returning in person from our staff as well. One of the last things that I would like to note as a part of our operations follow-up is around our immunization updates. During our last board presentation, we did talk about the compliances around immunization. And I do want to point out that the immunization rates will have an impact on any in-person instruction or testing that we may have, because it is the recommendation that those students who are not immunized would not be eligible for in-person instruction. So right now at Towson, we still have 101 students, which represents 28% of those students who are not up to date with immunizations. And at Lamont, we have 63 students, which reflects about 32% of the students that are not that are not properly immunized. So I did want to leave that. We are continuing those outreach efforts, emails, phone calls, personal contacts from our enrollment specialists and our nurses to get those immunization rates up. That concludes the updates that I have in terms of my slides. However, I did want to take a moment to address what was asked of me earlier in reference to the professional development of our staff. Those many of those have are coming from the financial audit. And as the director of operation, I am the person responsible for those corrective actions. Those I had planned on providing to the board on January 31st, as they were noted in our responses to the audit. And I will be outlining the particular measures, trainings, and our professional development that I've taken and that members of the team have taken in addressing some of those deficiencies that were disclosed during the financial audit. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Can you just give me that date again where you would have that outline for us?
Yes, so February 1st, January 31st is a Sunday. So February 1st, Monday, February 1st.
Okay, thank you. I did have another question as far as the reopening of the schools. You mentioned that staff surveys were sent out, or they will be sent out.
Yes, we did have staff surveys sent out. I think it's what was earlier in December, but it has been recommended that we survey again.
Yes.
And that it may not just happen one time, because the closer we get to opening, we know that needs or concerns will kind of continue to develop. So we do plan to reissue those staff surveys.
Okay, that was my concern, that there would be another survey issued, not just the one in December, because things have changed. And so I
Yes,
think it's important, in addition to the parents, but for sure a staff survey, and to assess where they are and their comfort levels with coming back.
Absolutely.
Well.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Any other questions for me?
Yeah, this is Carrie about the opening. You're not set on that date, are you? I mean, it's just around the corner, and there still seems to be a lot that needs to be done to determine if that's even feasible. So I hope you guys are going to be flexible enough.
Are you talking about the February 8th date that I mentioned in the presentation? So yes, we are flexible on that date, and we do recognize that there's a number of planning that amount of planning that needs to take place. But keep in mind that this is the virtual tour to, again, keep the communication open with our staff and families to let them see what we are doing to prepare the buildings for reopening. So I don't know if you remember the last town hall, Mr. Miller showcased some of the upgrades that we were making to the building. There have been some additional things that are being done, and he'll go over that in his presentation, but we just wanted to make sure that our staff and families are aware of what we're doing to have the buildings prepared.
Okay. You haven't heard anything from the school since December. So, you know, I know February 1 was kind of listed months ago. To have February 8th doesn't seem quite realistic, to be quite honest, for people in general, I think, to prepare to come back to school or the classroom. So,
yeah, so it's not our in-person, instruction. It's another showcase or virtual tour of the buildings so that families can see what we're doing in preparation for in-person instruction. We
okay.
yeah.
On the 8th. Is that what you're saying, Stephanie? On the 8th?
Yes, on the 8th. And we issued a letter on January 15th to all of our parents, just indicating that we needed to move that reopening, that soft reopen from February 1st to February 8th, and kind of explaining why, and also providing some resources around educating themselves about the vaccinations, reminding parents about the immunization. So that letter was issued from Travis and I on January 15th.
On Class Dojo, or I can ask you that later. Parents, oh, okay.
Did you have
So if I can just if I can say something, I know that David Miller has been working with myself and a lot of other educators on the reopening plan. So there has been some planning. According, we may not be open or ready. No, I'm sorry, speaking too much. But Mr. Miller, David Miller, definitely has been planning and working on a reopening plan since the summer. And I was a part of that. So if David Miller can speak on that, that would be.
Yeah, so David Miller is going to present the facilities update. Travis Miller and I are taking the lead on drafting the actual COVID-19 reentry plan, and then we will then disseminate that to the various stakeholders to help to pull that whole plan together. That is the piece that Travis and I are working on. Travis will be taking the educational piece. I am taking the operationals piece, and operations will partner with facilities because that is a big part of the operationals piece. So that's how we have broken up the plan. So what the expectation is on February the 8th, that we would not just showcase the building readiness, but we will also have the framework of the COVID plan, but also keeping in mind what Carrie said, with February 8th coming right around the corner, we would want to also present to the board what direction we're taking to get board input. So there are some very critical time elements built into that February 8th date, and we do recognize that.
Hello, I have a question. I'm sorry. Is this for parents? Is this meeting for parents or just for staff?
You are welcome. You're most welcome.
This is
okay.
a public meeting for parents,
Okay.
staff, and the entire community. It's a public meeting.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Because I have a question. I missed the beginning of the meeting, but are you discussing? So is everyone returning, or are you doing that? How are you doing that?
So that will be formally addressed in the framework of the reentry plan, and I would not want to speak prematurely because there's still some major decisions. All decisions that we're making will be aligned with the CDC and the recommended guidelines. Right now, the capacities are either 25% or 50%. There are even further limitations that indicate the ages of the children. Right now, we know that 11 is the max per classroom, but we're looking at closer CDC guidelines, which indicate that If there is a pre-K 3 or 4, that the recommended numbers may be 8. If there's a kindergarten, the recommended numbers may be 10. And if they are first grade or more, then the recommended numbers are 11. So I can say that as we are looking at school reentry, most likely we will go with the hybrid plan, which will offer 4 days of instructional learning with 2 cohorts on Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, the building's closed for deep cleaning, and Thursdays and Friday for the second cohort. But exactly how that looks, who comes back first, who will accept the seat, there's a lot more work that's needed in that area, but that's about the gist of the framework without going into too much more, because there is more work and more consideration and more data looking and more. So just it's a lot more that needs to go.
Right.
But from
Okay.
a quick
Okay.
framework,
And
that's the way we anticipate
right.
it to look.
Okay. And I just have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
You muted, Miss Melody. If you
Miss
can't-
Melody.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. So I know you said you can't go into it, which I understand right now. But if I have, if we have one child, because I have multiple grades, I have 4 different grades. And so if we have one child that is having an IEP, or he's in the critical intervention stages, like I'm doing with one child, do you think all of my children are going to go like on one schedule, the same schedule, or do you think it's going to be like split up between families? Like, you understand what I mean?
Yes.
What I'm trying to ask? Okay.
I certainly do. So that the parent survey that we sent out, that is the most appropriate place to express those type of things. And those are the things that we would like to hear. I know there is an open-ended part of the survey for you to express those. So if you haven't done the survey, I would highly encourage you to do so. I know that both
I did
campus. Okay, thank you. So I know that both campuses have reissued the survey in the event that a number of families have not responded. Thank you very much. For
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, I think Rebecca's saying you can go.
Oh, okay.
Muted.
I saw, yeah, okay.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
thanks, Dr. O.
No problem. I was lip reading. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mr.
I can see Rebecca kind of talking, but I thought she was muted. So I to make sure it's okay for me to jump in, I will pull up the facility slides and we can hop right into the hot topic, which is preparing for the facilities reopening. So to introduce myself, I'm David Miller. I'm the Regional Facilities Director for Imagine Schools Mid-Atlantic Region. And we are in the midst of getting the buildings prepared for reopening. I think we all have to recognize that this is a very fluid moment, and we don't have exact dates set, but looking at that, the facilities team is working very diligently to get the buildings prepared when this time comes. So it's still, as Stephanie was saying, there's still a lot of planning going on in terms of the actual timeframes and dates, just looking at what is happening with your community spread and the rates that are apparent in the Washington, D.C. community for COVID-19. So of course, that is the most important factor. And but we want to be ready for when we do have a reopening, and most likely kind of a graduated reopening where you would have small groups of students initially, probably at younger grades, and then eventually up to a full hybrid where you would have half enrollment basically, or depending on how many parents choose to bring their children back for in-person learning. But the facilities teams have been working to really freshen up the Lamont and Tolson campuses to make them inviting for scholars and teachers return. We've been doing a lot of repairs and maintenance work as preparation for this, including patching walls and touch-up painting. We've done some roof repairs, minor roof repairs at both buildings. We've got replacement of several damaged floor tiles in the Tolson building, and also replacement of some of the classroom cabinet doors at Tolson. They are showing their age. We are really making a concerted effort to get both buildings to look really nice and shiny and as new as we can get them to look. So that's really, we want this to look like a great place to come back to and a safe space to come back to for scholars and for parents. We've also been doing some window repairs at Tolson. And of course, we do continued deep cleaning and floor burnishing as well, just to keep up and being prepared for, if need be, a turnaround of 30 days, 45 days, whatever we have to reopen the buildings for some in-person learning. When we look at the reopening, some of the things that we're certainly looking at and focusing on are things like health screening. There have been updated guidelines from OSSI and DC Health that came out right before Christmas on December 21st. And this is going to affect a little bit how we do things. And we're working now internally to kind of finalize these plans for health screening. One of the guidance recommendations now is that temperature checks are no longer recommended by CDC. It is still something we can do voluntarily, and we would probably still collect that information if people want to volunteer it. But what the health screening is now focused on is these kind of three things they call ask, look. So ask is basically going through those 14 questions that I'm sure a number of you have done if you've come into our buildings or if you've been in other places like a doctor's office or something like that, where they assess the common COVID-19 symptoms. And those are 14 questions. Then the second ask is just, have you been in close contact with anybody who, has been exposed to COVID-19 or may have had, or may have COVID-19? So looking at that. And then looking is just a visual inspection for symptoms. So when we do bring
Mr. Miller, you muted by accident.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Where did I mute?
You just in the last sentence.
Okay. I don't know what I hit. Okay, apologize for that. And I was saying that the look aspect of the health screening is really going to be important and part of like a training regimen that we will have together for our staff to look for visual inspection for symptoms. So, does a scholar look like they have a fever? Do they look flushed? Do they have a running nose? Things like that. So we are getting more detailed guidance now on the health screening, which is very helpful. Again, mentioned this at our last board meeting, but we have been working with a nurse consultant from DC Public Charter School Board that has recommended to us to adopt an online or app-based health screening that would be completed by parents or guardians and school staff before entrance, and that would be done daily. She said that with schools that have had limited in-person learning now, that's just more efficient for daily building entry process, and it's just allowing for faster entry instead of doing screening on site. What we would have set up is a screening area for kind of a secondary screening, so that if someone forgets to do the pre-entrance screening, if it's not completed, or if an individual feels like, on their way to school, they feel like they've started to experience symptoms, or if someone just at that screening area sees, again, a scholar or a staff person, it just looks like they might not be feeling well, we would then go through the screening again with that person. We are working right now on setting up the health screening areas for staff and scholars to have these set up for our ELL WIDA testing that would be happening in the end of February. We are supposed to have kind of a limited on-site testing, though. I know there was a conversation today that might be pushed back a little bit, depending on what's going on with the current numbers and everything. And then these are some photos of what we've been working on in terms of social distancing, some of the aspects that we've put in place. And some of this was demonstrated during the town hall that we had in mid-December for parents and staff. But we are setting up the classrooms to be socially distanced with the scholar desks and seating 6 feet apart. We have moved a number of materials, extra desks, tables, chairs, and shared toys and manipulatives to storage. A lot of that now is being stored in Tolson's storage area. And then we've also moved a number of items to Lamont's multipurpose room. We've placed additional signage throughout the buildings to just show way markers for one-ways in the hallways and for the stairwells as well in Tolson and Lamont. And we have plexiglass screens installed at the administrative offices right now, at the counters and the front counter windows. We are also in process right now of ordering plexiglass screening for the desks as well. So there's a little bit of a turnaround time on that. So we are hoping to get those in the next 1 to 2 weeks, but that is one of our pressing issues right now, is getting those in place and installed for the student desks as well. Of course, we'll have guidelines adopted for mandatory use of face masks once we are back in the building for in-person learning. And I also wanted to note that we did receive a pretty significant personal protective equipment donation from the Presidential Inauguration Committee that was secured by the Alvena Foundation, which Rebecca helped coordinate for us. We picked that up last Thursday right after the inauguration. And it was really like a carload full of personal protective equipment. We've inventoried it, and there were about 300 plastic face shields, around 400 disposable masks, a few dozen K95 masks, some plexiglass screens, and a number of other items. That's really helpful to get just more personal protective equipment beyond what we ordered back in the summer and that we have on stock right now for potential reopening. And we've had these continuous discussions on these on HVAC and environmental issues, but we are starting to install the hypochlorous-based ionizing air purifiers. That is currently ongoing, and this is a photo right now of one of these in action. So this actually will cover an entire room. This is in the front office. Had them in place for about a week now, and they seem to be working pretty well, and we're happy with their performance. We also have the IonoMax electrostatic misters, and these are really efficient electrostatic misters that we can use to sanitize the classrooms and lavatories. I say 5 to 10 minutes. Really, it takes a lot less time than that. You can knock out a pretty significant space of the building, and classrooms can take 2 or 3 minutes to really spray down with this. And it's a very fine, dry mist. It doesn't leave like a sticky finish or any dampness to the surface. So that's helpful too, because you can really just go in and hit a space to disinfect. On this Monday and Tuesday, we do have our HVAC technicians coming in, and we'll be, again, working with us just to instruct our facilities manager on how to set the systems to building air flush mode if the building does need to be flushed. And we'll also be doing audits and recertifications of the HVAC adjustments in both the Lamont and Tolson buildings. We're finalizing estimates right now for hand sanitizing stations at the entrances of each classroom. And then we are also seeking right now water bottle service, either purchasing water bottle stations with water bottle fillers, or renting them as well. We're kind of doing a pricing comparison because the water fountains will be turned off, and that's been seen as a best practice for safety in the building. So we'll have one of those in each of the classrooms and in the office spaces as well. And then looking at lavatory capacity and safety, I've got a photo here of a couple of the bathrooms and how we're kind of screening off the toilets, urinals, and sinks so that there's spacing, actually 6 feet of space in between each fixture for students to use. And the number of scholars that use the lavatories at any single time will be limited when they enter, and the use will be staggered. The staff will really be working to schedule toilet use, but also, understanding that we're going to have our facilities teams kind of monitoring the use throughout the day to provide cleaning in between. We are also going to have these, the air purifiers installed in the lavatories. So we've already checked the electrical, and we've got all that ready to set up. And again, with the hand sanitizing stations at the classroom, we also are finalizing estimates for the installation of the touchless soap dispensers. And then the final item that we're doing in preparation right now is setting up isolation rooms in both Lamont and Tolson buildings. There was new guidance received from OSSI and DC Health, which did change kind of our strategy on setting these up. Now they want the isolation rooms to be limited to single occupancy. So we've now made the decision to convert in each building 2 office spaces to use as individual rooms for the isolation rooms. And those are just being set up so that just one scholar or student, if they began to feel ill or felt that they had symptoms, would then isolate in that space until they were able to leave the building with their parents or with family member. And it just kind of changed because initially we were going to put it into larger spaces like the media center, and there was a special education in Tolson, and then there was a special education room in the Lamont building that we were going to use, and we were going to use screening to kind of isolate. And now we were told that the guidance did change and they want it to be single rooms. And again, we'll be using the HOCL air purifiers in those spaces as well, along with negative air pressure machines. So we are in process of kind of, I feel like we can see the finish line, and really we're trying to get these final items ordered and installed so that we can, have things ready for that point in time when we can have staff begin to return and then scholars begin to return. And then just a real quick overview, as a number of people know, if you've been by the school lately, on the exterior, we have been focused on, and Mr. Jason Connect, who's the director of athletics, has been really pivotal in directing this process of these site improvements to the Tolson campus that really include installation of a basketball court, and a really nice exterior basketball court. We've had padding installed this month on fence posts and railings, and padding on the CMU wall, the brick wall there that's on the building. And in February, we're going to have more work done, like the additional netting above the top fence, and then lining, mesh lining. And then into spring, once the weather gets better and we have proper temperatures, there'll be an acrylic sports court surfacing and painting of that. Then the product will be complete, the project will be complete. But that's really going to be a great resource at the Tolson campus. And that is the presentation on facilities. Are there any questions? Stop sharing this time. Any questions? I know there's got to be some.
This is Dr. Harris. The air purifier picture image that you showed, are you saying one of those is going to be in every classroom and including the hallways, or how is that working?
They're going to be in every classroom, and they are, they cover up to 5,000 square feet. So our typical classrooms are anywhere from about 850 to 1,000 square feet. So they'll be more than adequate in the classrooms. We're also going to be putting them into individual offices as well. We have not looked at putting them in the hallways yet, though I did find a kind of larger volume version of that same type of system, a hypochlorous disinfectant system that I just found it recently doing some additional research. So I am looking at those as well. So that is a possibility in the hallways, though really traffic in the hallways is going to be pretty limited to really just the way the practices and the best practices and guidance we're getting now is that in the hallways, it will just be basically coming in and out and then going to the restrooms. Most of the school day will be contained within the individual classrooms.
Yeah, so that was my concern, just what's going to be done for the hallway traffic. But I understand what you're saying.
Hey, Dave, this is Susan. I just have a quick question about the windows in both buildings. Are they operable?
Unfortunately, no. In the Lamont building, they are.
Okay.
In the Tolson building, they are not.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so Lamont does provide us a little more options for airflow in that case. So that is one negative about the Tolson building, is that we have non-operable windows. That's actually one reason why, as we did more and more research, we kind of landed on the idea of using a disinfectant system instead of just solely relying on an airflow system to actually try to kill any virus that might be in the building. And I do think that this disinfectant, using these, once we get past COVID-19 pandemic and get it under control, I do think that in future years, they'll be great to have just for cold and flu season in general, because it also is effective against really any living viruses and germs, mold, fungus, things like that. So yeah, I think it'll be helpful for that too.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure thing.
I just have a comment. I think it'll be helpful, if possible, not to create a layer of work, but if someone in-house can help to do just a short video on what you just presented, so parents will be comfortable, bringing their children back, because I think we've really done a lot that can make a parent feel comfortable. I mean, granted, there will be some who still wouldn't, and that's very well understood, but for those who decide to allow their children to come, I think it'll be great for them to just know what we've done and will continue to do.
Yes, and that is actually part of this event on February 8th that's being
Okay.
scheduled. So we're kind of in the process of hoping we'll be filming next week. So yeah, the facilities will be a big aspect of that presentation as well.
Awesome, great. So I'm just looking at the time, it's 6:38. We still have one more item from the academic committee. School leaders, how much time do you think you need?
About an
Sorry?
about an hour.
So we'll have a closed session for you both, right? We'll adjourn the meeting.
I think Ashley and I, can we do maybe 10 minutes, Ashley? You think it's
Yes, I think, can we have 10 to 15 minutes, please?
Okay, 10 to, so
Okay.
let's say 20 for both schools, about 20 minutes for both schools, for
Oh,
both campuses?
yes, total.
Okay, awesome. So it's 6:39, so by 7 o'clock. Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay.
And I think we've covered quite a lot today, and having each person, move the slides has also saved us a lot of time.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. So Ms. Pella and I are presenting our school leaders report. And tonight we are focusing on mainly teaching and learning, or the teaching and learning area. And we're going to dig deeper into our big rocks under the teaching and learning domain. Oops, I clicked too fast. There we go.
So as Ashley mentioned, we do want to focus more attention to teaching and learning and what's actually happening in the classrooms. The Academic Excellence Committee has actually taken a large role in coming to actually visit some of our classes, which we're really excited about. We did what Ashley and I did is we created an instructional library in which we started to provide some of the synchronous and asynchronous videos of actual teaching of our teachers, just to provide an inside look into what our teachers are doing in the classroom daily, and just in terms of partnering to make decisions around professional development and how best to support our teachers. Those videos were not showing the actual teachers in action. We do have students in some of those videos. So just to protect the privacy of our students, and also just the instructional integrity of privacy for our teachers. We did share those videos with our Academic Excellence Committee and the board to just kind of have an idea of what we are speaking to this evening and why we made some of the decisions around professional development that we made. So what we shared with the board for Lamont were 4 asynchronous videos. They were both directional and as well as instructional, basically meaning that there are videos that you can pre-record for students asynchronously that give students direction. So for example, if a scholar needs to be reminded on how to log on to a certain platform or how to use a certain platform, in the absence of the teacher, be it on an asynchronous day or during, let's say during homework and you forgot what your teacher told you, you can go onto that pre-recorded directional video and get directions. The instructional portions are there to provide actual instructional direction, which could be for the same purpose. You know, if a student is doing homework and they forgot how to do a particular math problem, they could go to an asynchronous instructional video and go over what their teacher taught that day, or a teacher may decide to use a pre-recorded instructional video prior to their official lesson the next day to provide the students some opportunities to do some self-directed learning and pre-work prior to the actual instruction that's given. Video B was a synchronous video, which also encompassed the teacher as well as the students who were in that video. And we did attach some of the formal and informal observation forms that we use when viewing these videos, when doing either walkthroughs or doing formal evaluations of our teachers. I know we're limited on time.
Yes, later in the presentation, we do have a couple of snapshots of our formal observation form that we have outlined to help guide our work moving forward with our teaching and learning for teachers. So just to echo Ms. Pella, she pointed out about our charge to really get a library and a bank of both synchronous and asynchronous videos. This will most definitely support us as we move closer to going back or reopening, whether it is spring or in the fall. We know that we want to equip our teachers with all the strategies they need in order to deliver high quality hybrid learning. And that looks like not just your recorded synchronous videos, but also getting those tools around the asynchronous. So for Tolson, we've looked closely at that focus around building that student engagement and having the use of videos to look at that engagement, as well as your use of time. So being able to maximize your in-seat time with students by taking some of the things that you would normally do brick and mortar in-seat, but putting them and placing them in the videos. And then here we have some other forms, such as our coaching observation forms, as well as our peer observation forms that we utilize in our collaborative planning. Okay. And that does circle us back to that vision of excellence. Our AEC, or the Academic Excellence Committee, did charge us with gathering exemplars of the work that's happening in our buildings and having opportunities for our teachers to look at that excellent work or those exemplars. Okay. Ms. Pella, you're on mute.
My son was having a moment. I forgot I muted. I'm sorry, everyone. So in our reflections, our video reflections, Ashley and I noticed some big rocks or trends across both campuses. And some of that was also viewed during not only our Academic Excellence Committee meeting, but also our Rise Up meetings, which consist of coaches and regional members who give us feedback on instruction as well as support. So it's very consistent with the feedback that we've received from both our AEC and Rise Up team. And those rocks are effective use of time, student engagement, using certain type of videos and ensuring that the video is aligned with the goal set, as well as pre-work. Effective use of time is just really ensuring that teachers understand, as well as leaders understand, and parents understand, and students understand that we have a very limited amount of time virtually. For example, a 90-minute reading block can be reduced to 40 or 45 minutes, and making sure within that structured amount of time that you have, that your lessons and instruction is very targeted and allows time for students to engage. And that leads us right into engagement. One of the things that has been a challenge for teachers as well, honestly, with school leaders, with going into this virtual situation with a kind of I don't want to say an empty tool belt, but just maybe not having as much experience virtually as brick and mortar, is really understanding how do we engage our students in a virtual scenario. We have our children at home and they're trying to learn. We have, of course, in brick and mortar, we have cooperative groups and we have those strategies down, but how do we actually make sure that that's happening virtually, especially in a short window of time? And again, that's just going into an asynchronous model, balancing verbal and nonverbal engagement. So if you think about think, pair, share, using Padlet would be an example of nonverbal engagement, whereas Google Slides or maybe peer editing would be an example of verbal engagement. Asynchronously, during Wednesday, one of the things that both campuses are now doing fully is an asynchronous Wednesday, which is essentially a work day. workday, both for students and teachers, to have an opportunity to catch up on assignments that a child may have missed, and also asynchronous assignments that are due on that Wednesday. And what we've incorporated in both campuses is a weekly choice board or an activity list. And on that Wednesday, the asynchronous work is listed for scholars in pre-K through 8th grade. And we have infused some elements of choice. For Lamont, it's in reading and math, trying to provide our scholars 2 choices for their reading work and 2 choices for math work. With this virtual learning, we're trying to do everything gradually and go at a pace that is realistic when we're incorporating new ideas for teachers and students. And we spoke a little bit about asynchronous and synchronous videos. A lot of the work has come from Dr. Sula, and it's a company that we've partnered with to help assist us in the transition to virtual learning. It was brought through us through this summer, actually, through professional development that was set up by Imagine Schools and has kind of continued throughout the school year. And it's really proven to be effective in helping support our students when it comes to preparing before a class, or if a student doesn't understand certain concepts, being able to record those videos to support our students has been quite helpful, and we look forward to continuing that work. And then also pre-work, again, which ties to effective use of time. When you come onto a virtual lesson, you may not want to spend time doing a do now in that lesson. The do now may be something that you assign for homework, and then students are able to join the class and engage based on that do now that they've already done. And so really, if you look at all of these big rocks, they're all tied together. And we think we have a solid plan in making sure that teachers and scholars are supported as we move through these big rocks that you'll see throughout the remainder of the presentation.
Okay. As we looked, as we identified those big rocks, our next step was to look at, well, what does professional learning look like for our teachers? And how do we support through safe practice? Because we are learning something new and we're trying something different, as Dr. Sella charges us. And we understand that one, teacher voice and choice comes in. So we talk about choice board for our students. We have to model that as leaders. And we do that through the practices that we take with professional learning. When we first introduced our 5 types of videos, we looked at not just giving them all 5 types and saying, pick the 5, but gave some choice around it based on what your experience is and your teaching and learning feedback that you've received. Where would we start first? And right here on the left is a sample of that Mentimeter survey that was given, as well as the time frame for that. We also utilize templates and resources to help guide what these videos look and sound like in our planning sessions. So for instance, we spoke about the 5 types. If our teachers chose to create a morning message for their asynchronous video, there's space for them to brainstorm, but then also receive feedback from their peers. So the last area of our process is how do we incorporate that peer feedback, and we place that in our PLT or our collaborative planning session. And you'll see over here on the right, there's a sample of the gallery walk that we did with our teachers synchronously. Okay. And you're on mute, Pella.
Sorry again. So on this next slide is just providing you an example of what our walkthrough forms and what our formal observation forms look like. And this is an area that we're looking to target as we are creating professional development plans for our teachers and how we're going to move forward through the second half of the school year. And that is a focus on lesson delivery. Specifically having a clear learning target, activities and assignments that are engaging, as well as appropriate pacing. So in the beginning of the school year, we introduced, of course, our teachers to this evaluation document. Tulsa and Lamont's are pretty similar. They have the same exact components, but this is an example of Le Mans, which may look a little bit different from the exact form that Tolson is using. However, the areas are the same. And when we looked at our big rocks, in looking at our evaluation tools, we wanted to really be clear on what we need to focus on in terms of preparation for our teachers instructionally. And the highlighted areas are where we are focused for the month of February. So this is just a snapshot in a large portion of our overall formal evaluation tool that we use for our teachers.
Okay, and all of this just sums back up to our improvement cycle approach that we want to take to our professional development plan. So we understand that as we are learning new approaches to how to best serve our scholars and how to best deliver high quality hybrid learning, we need to plan, and we need to plan collaboratively. And then after that planning, we carry out that plan. But then we don't just leave it there. The next step for us is to study and study through student evidence and act upon that. Do we change the plan? Do we add something to the plan? So what we're presenting here after our meeting with the Academic Excellence Committee and our walkthrough in January, we have a plan for further delivering professional learning, but using that plan, do, study, act cycle for our teachers. Planning in this January, where we're looking at how do we restructure our guided planning sessions with teachers so that we're maximizing time. As Mr. Miller mentioned earlier, we want to ensure that whatever our teachers are planning for is something that we see in the classroom. So if we're planning this way, if we're planning for hybrid learning, then we want to ensure, or if we want to see hybrid learning in our classrooms, we want to ensure that our planning is set up that way and we're getting feedback that way. And then we're going to give guidance on the lesson delivery. As you see here at the top, these are the key stakeholders that we have identified to help support these aligned actions, because it's important that this is a collaborative process and that it is safe practice as well. And we move over to the right to our coaches, where their part is to provide those exemplars and models in the collaborative planning sessions and provide feedback or provide spaces for feedback. And not that the school leader doesn't provide feedback, but there's the focus there for our coach role. And then our teachers, they are there to practice and provide peer feedback, and then also contribute to our vision of excellence, which is our video library. And then lastly, we have our Rise Up and our Academic Excellence Committee, where the role is to probe with questions and provide those supporting resources. So here's where we are in January. We look forward to moving through our plan and coming back with some of our those actions as we've implemented this part of our professional development, and coming back and showcasing what that looks like real time. And I think that is our time.
Thank you, ladies.
Questions?
Oh, go ahead. Yep. Hi, this is Dana. One, thank you all for putting forth that much effort into really presenting clearly what you're doing in teaching and learning. That's really going to help move the needle. And it's really great to see how you're connecting the observation look-fors to the professional learning that you're going to put in place. And we are very excited to see what that do component is from the PDSA cycle that you explained. I just want to just shout you out for the choice that you're building in for both students and teachers, building out that video library for their reference. And like I said, I appreciate the alignment to the big rocks and observation. I guess my questions right now are around the coaching and then the data outcomes that we'll be able to see based on this. Okay. What do you anticipate being able to share with us next time that shows how this intentional planning of teachers has a direct impact on student outcomes? What data are we using right now that we could use to assess the progress of this over time here in this forum?
So I think there's several data points that we could use, but I think what would be most efficient the use of our STAR assessments,
okay,
as well as our weekly skills test that we provide our scholars. just overall, and then also tracking the engagement of our students. So when it comes to engagement, for example, one of the things that I've begun doing is looking at the total number of scholars in the classroom and how many students actually had an opportunity to engage. So I think in looking at data, what I look to present is data around the learning outcomes for the weekly based assessments that we give our students in the form of skills tests, as well as the increase in numbers of students who are actually engaged in their lessons. One of the things that we've also, Ashley and I have also talked about is building a library of student work and student work samples. And I think that's also a good data point to actually look at what the students are producing to make those determinations on whether or not the professional development that we put in place has been effective.
I think those two indicators sound great in terms of engagement and student work. I think I'm wondering about the use of time piece too. I know that when the Academic Excellence Committee went to observe the classroom, we noted that learning didn't actually take place until about 14 to 15 minutes into the lesson. And as we all agree, like that is not a good use of time. So I wonder if we can also track, like when you all are going into classrooms, how soon are teachers jumping into either the use of an instructional video that's helpful or academic discussion? How much time does it take for teachers to get to teaching and engaging students?
Okay. I know that so in our plan, part of our cycle, we definitely put on there the guide, providing that structure. So first giving, hey, let's adding the times into those areas and being intentional about this is how much I'm using and that's it. And then bringing tools and resources to help move that.
Right.
In addition, I love the fact that now coming back and then tracking those minutes.
Yes.
As a school leader.
Yes. So I think next time when we have this conversation, I think if we could see the tracking of those 3 indicators, that would be great.
And Dana, if I can add also, that is part of the purpose of the planning initiative for February, because if teachers are planning correctly, then you're going to see a better use of time.
Absolutely.
And I think we're saying the same thing from different lenses, but that's where the connection of planning and instruction comes in, because you should not, in any school across the world, basically have a 15-minute delay between the start of class and the beginning of instruction.
Exactly.
Unless that's been planned now. And we understand, technology concerns happen, but we want to minimize those as often as possible.
Agree.
Yeah, if I may just add to that, if you would ask the teacher, I would doubt that teacher would say he didn't plan for that time. I think it's also just really understanding how to make the best use of time. Was that effective at that time? Was it effective to ask that type of question or use that type of activity as I do now? So the person would have said, yeah, I planned it. We did this, but it just wasn't effective. That was just not the kind of activity to do in a virtual setting. And I think just really understanding that will be very important. Like, what's effective? What are my objectives to this lesson? And is this learning activity effective to achieve that objective? Does that help, like, kind of clarify at least what I also think I saw that day?
Yes, but to add to that, Rebecca, what to do in moments when what we did have planned doesn't necessarily go how we plan it. So when do we pivot? And do we have, as a school leader, have I given you enough tools and resources for you to pivot with something different? So, and being able to make that pivot.
Yes. Now that what you mentioned, I know we discussed that at that meeting as well. That's just an essential tool any teacher or facilitator should have, because anything can break at any point. So your laptop can stop working, anything can stop working. What are the higher order thinking questions you would start to ask when everything else isn't working? So that in and of itself is another PD. What do you do when everything else breaks? So that's kind of separate from that other piece of using time effectively. This one is what type of hot questions do you have literally on your mind that you just pull out when you have that downtime because something else is happening?
Mhm.
Then I
And
know
I
we also
just wanted
talked
to,
about, oh,
no, Rebecca, that's a really good point. And I was gonna say, years ago, I guess when I first came to the board, there used to be, and I don't know if this was from the regional team, but when I did my observations several years ago, they used to have hot questions on the walls. Like, and I don't know if that's, I haven't been in the buildings in a while, but that was a resource that all the, at least pre-K teachers had at Tolson when I first started, that they could always refer to. So that is definitely a resource that every teacher needs. They need those higher order thinking questions available on hand. And I know they used to have them. I don't know if they do anymore.
so maybe we
And
can,
it's not content. This is not content specific. This is the way to pose a question that can be used for any content level. Because, you know, higher order thinking questions is a skill that is transferable throughout multiple subjects, but it is something that should be on hand. You should always have it. You should always be able to have good academic discussions, no matter what the technology is doing. So yeah, pre-K still has hot. I see Michelle said it in the chat. So
Mhm. We do, and we have it embedded in our planning where it's prompting, but then just going back to, like we said, having that structured planning where we can guide and give feedback, because we may plan for it, but then we need to practice and model before we're implementing it.
yes,
so,
ma'am.
thank you. I'm looking at the time. I just wanted to add one more thing, but we don't really have to go into details about that. Maybe for the next presentation. I know we talked about holding coaches accountable as well. So I think it'll be helpful to talk more about that at the next meeting. How are we holding the coaches accountable? Because if teachers are being held accountable for student performance, coaches should be held accountable for teacher performance as well. And what are the coaches doing to make sure that the teachers are better prepared? So, and how are we holding them accountable as well? Because it all should not fall on the teacher. I mean, otherwise, why are the coaches getting paid? You know?
So Rebecca, we can present evidence of that as well. I know that we don't want to, we can speak to it today, but if that's something that we can present as a next step, we can present that.
Yeah, let's talk about that for the next meeting, because it's not only the evidence, but also definitely the evidence, you know, but how is it being tracked? So the evidence should include how it's being tracked, what goals that they set, you know, have been set for them as well. All right, so I know the work of the governance committee has been touched on you know, throughout the presentations for today, especially with the committees. Any other updates on governance that we need to know?
Hi, this is Carrie. Just working on reviewing all board materials that need to be current and updated, so that from that after that's done, we'll just move to a new format for board orientation. I've reached out to the school directly on some materials that we need updating for our files, and then we should be able to move to the next step after that. So I'll keep everyone updated.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that we're continuing to recruit for the board as well and expanding on the board. So if anybody has any, you know, good candidates that they want to pass along, whether that be parents or otherwise, and we're also connecting with education board partners on helping with that recruitment as well. But please pass those along if you have anybody in mind who would be a good fit for the board.
Thank you. And we are, you know, in the spirit of expanding the board, we are also interested in the representation. So I know we have a growing Latinx population. It'll be great to have at least one person on the board to represent that population as well. So, you know, that would be helpful. All right, so it's 7:06. We are just a few minutes behind, but I'm still hoping that we'll finish by 7:30. You know, what's left of the agenda should not take a long time. What's left on the agenda for today is the renewal, the vote on the renewal of the operating agreement. So the board had a retreat, And during that retreat, we talked about our fiduciary responsibility as a board. You know, why are we here? What is our role? And what is our responsibility as well? So based on the operating agreement we signed with Imagine Schools last year, we have to notify Imagine Schools by February of this year whether we intend to renew the operating agreement or not. In order to make a formal notification, the board will have to vote whether or not to renew that agreement. Now, based on the deliberations of the retreat, some discussions came up. So the way the vote will take place tonight would be in three folds. One will be whether to close the school. That would be one vote. Another vote would be whether to renew with Imagine. And then the third vote will be whether to renew with another turnaround organization. So if the vote, is to keep the school open, to renew with Imagine, then things move forward. If the vote is to keep the school open, to renew with another organization, it would be a turnaround organization based on the deliberations of the retreat, because DC is losing its appetite for operating organizations like CMOs generally. They feel that some of the funds that go to CMOs should go to the students. So, and that was a part of the deliberations of the retreat. And if it's to close the school, I just have one vote. So once you look at me, I am just going based on the deliberations of that meeting. So the way that would work today, I would just, we'll make a motion to vote, and I'll ask the board members to just send me a direct message on the number of votes for each of those three items I've mentioned. It would be in order. And I'll just need a few minutes to tally the votes, and I'll make the formal announcements of the outcome of the vote. Now, before we actually do that, if there are any comments from Imagine and our attorneys, I would like to welcome that at this time, and then we'll go into that.
So, good evening, Madam Board Chair. Thank you so much for this opportunity and space. And so we appreciate the opportunity as Imagine Schools to operate both Hope campuses, Hope Community Public Charter Schools, both Tolson and Lamond. As you and I have had several meetings, and I wanted to just reiterate to the entire board, as well as all constituents and all families, it is an honor for us to operate both schools. We will continue with that honor if given the opportunity through our turnaround approach in terms of the Rise Up team, continuing to accept sole responsibility and opportunities to remedy the enrollment through our marketing efforts, to continue with rigorous professional development as we continue to assess and work through the Rise Up team, and with our two awesome LEA directors, Stephanie Miner, Operations Director, and also Travis Miller, the new Academic Director, along with a host of leaders within the region to continue to provide day-to-day support to both campuses with intentionality and focus. In terms of next steps, we would love the opportunity to offer concessions in terms of what we can continue to work collaboratively to do, what we can continue to collaborate around what we've previously spoken of, leasehold improvements, as well as looking at the operating agreement in terms of time frame and future terms. Would love the opportunity, if given the chance, to continue to plan strategically. So to hold a collaborative strategic planning session to indicate what it would look like over the next couple years if we were to continue to operate the school, just to ensure that investments aligned to the actual work and the needs of the school. As I hope everyone is aware, and I'll echo this again and what was shared with you, Madam Board Chair. Again, it's an honor. We will do what's in the best interest of children, as well as the beautiful families that we serve, as well as the awesome teachers that we serve and that we have. And so with that, I know there were a few items on the table in terms of concessions. Just want to note that through strategic planning, we are definitely willing to remedy those huge bucket items that we've spoken of. Again, enrollment, which subsequently will lead into budget, which of course we know could come through the leasehold improvement. Cannot give an actual number. I know the requested number, what was requested in terms of the leasehold improvements. Again, as noted in other meetings, I am certainly willing to do what is needed to remedy that and to do what's in the best interest of the children, but would love the opportunity to do that through strategic planning. Thank you to the entire board. Thank you, Madam Board Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so, you know, I have our attorney on the call today, so I don't make any mistakes. And I was just informed that the vote actually has to be public. You cannot send me a direct message. So you either have to raise your hands or do the raise hand feature on the chat. And if a motion is made to actually vote on the items, as I've mentioned them in the order, then it would have to be by roll call and you would have to state your name. So should I just ask, would you just go into the votes without a motion and you do the raise hand feature? Or do we do a motion for each vote and a roll call?
Madam
Chair.
Chair.
Yes, Heather, can you explain that, please? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well. It's nice to see all of you. We are in the process of implementing the new requirements that went in place on October 1st, which require our charter schools to follow the DC open meeting statute. And to make things a little more complicated, we have COVID, so we're doing things electronically versus being in person. So what I would recommend is that the chair will, she's outlined each of the three options available to the board this evening, starting with whether or not there is a desire of the board to close the school. If that option is not adopted, then obviously you'll move to the second option, which is whether or not you wish to renew your operating agreement with Imagine. And then the third option that was outlined for the board is whether or not you would like to pursue entering into and negotiating an agreement with a new turnaround operator. So what will happen is the chair will ask if there is a motion in that order. If there is no motion, that will be off the table and we will call for the second option, again, asking if there's a motion. If there's a motion and a second, then what we will do is have the motion second and then discussion on that particular motion, and then call for a vote. And just for one of the things I know that the board has been very interested in, as has the chair, is making sure that all of our constituents, families, students, parents, teachers, all have a lot of transparency around all of these discussions. And so I would just recommend that if you are voting on a motion, that you would just state your name and whether you're voting in favor of the motion or against the motion. And then we'll do a tally on that particular motion before moving forward, just for clarity and for transparency.
Thank you, Heather. So there's one question here. Can someone abstain from voting?
So the only way that you can abstain from voting is, well, or that you really should consider abstaining from voting, is if you have a financial interest in the matters before you. So for example, if you are affiliated with Imagine in any way, you have a family member who works for Imagine, you have any sort of contract, with Imagine, which should have been previously disclosed if you're a board member, then you would be in a position you should not vote. Otherwise, you should make a vote on the motion.
So is there anyone who needs to disclose any other relationship with Imagine at this time? Okay, thanks. So can we have a motion to vote whether or not to keep the school open?
Madam Chair,
And
just
Heather,
for clarity,
please.
are you asking for a motion? I know originally it was posed as you're asking for a motion
Shut
on
down.
whether or not to close the school.
Yes, that's
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
thanks for clarifying that. And
Yeah, no
please
worries.
feel free
It's
to
getting
chime in at any
late. I
point.
know
I just
everybody's
want to
been
make
working
sure.
all day. I just wanted to clarify.
Thanks. So can we have a motion to decide whether to close the school?
And to be clear, if we have a motion, is that just opening up the vote? That's not voting to close the school, is that correct?
Correct. So if you make a motion, there's no obligation to have a motion. If the board feels strongly that they're not interested in the option, then no one needs to make the motion. We can move forward. But if you'd like to vote that option as a member of the board, you're certainly welcome to make the motion to see if it gets a second.
So I guess there's no motion. All right. So can we have a motion whether or not to renew with Imagine?
Now, I'm going to say something I said a little bit different on the last one. Because we have a current agreement with Imagine, I do think for public transparency purposes, it would be great to have a vote of the members whether or not you're choosing to renew. We have a legal trigger in our agreement that we do need to provide formal notification of the board. And I'd like to be able to provide our minutes with that vote as part of our contractual process, should you not choose to renew or should you choose to renew. So I caveated and took back what I said a minute ago on the previous motion.
And Heather, just to be clear, the motion, this is Susan, the motion should be affirmative. It shouldn't be whether, right? It should be
Yes,
the motion.
right. You're either asking for, you would either be providing a motion saying, I move to renew the operating agreement with Imagine, or alternatively, I move that we do not renew the operating agreement with Imagine.
Thanks.
Yes, clear as mud.
So whoever makes the motion, has that power to decide what your motion will be.
And we'll clarify it so that since it's been a little confusing and lots of options, I want everyone to know what we're voting on.
So we definitely need a motion is what council is recommending. So, I move that the board does not renew its operating agreement with Imagine.
And Susan, I second that motion.
Okay.
Okay, so vote yes would be that you are voting in favor of not renewing the agreement with Imagine.
And we need to do this by name.
By name, by roll call. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. And Rebecca, are you going to call us out? Are you going to name us one by one, or how do you want to do that?
Heather, what's your recommendation?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair, I would call the names one by one.
Okay, thank you. Susan Sabella?
Yes, I vote not to renew.
Thank you. Austin Alderich?
I vote not to renew with Imagine.
Carrie Smith?
I vote not to renew with Imagine Schools.
Altira Brown?
I vote not to renew with Imagine.
Dana Bogle,
I vote not to renew with Imagine.
Orinthia Harris,
I vote not to renew with Imagine.
Chris Cody,
I vote not to renew with Imagine.
is there anyone else here that I have not called? Okay, and I also vote not to renew with Imagine. Okay. So we have a unanimous vote not to renew with Imagine. Heather, do you have any comments on that?
Yep, so I also have a 8-0 vote count as well. So for this particular item, for members of the board, we will be preparing a formal notice pursuant to our agreement, which has to be sent to Imagine no later than February 26th. So I'll be working to prepare that with the board chair. I'm sure it will be circulated for your review, but we will begin that process, and I'll be happy to reach out to Mr. Toller. I see him on the line as well, so we can talk about next steps. So.
Okay, thank you. The third is a motion to negotiate with another turnaround organization. So as I mentioned earlier, DC's appetite for CMOs are is dwindling. Based on our conversations as a board, the option would be to consider a turnaround organization. So that would be the next vote. Should we enter into negotiation discussions with a potential turnaround organization?
And for clarity for the board, I think all of you have discussed this previously. There is no predetermined turnaround operator that we are voting on tonight. This is simply to start the process of identifying the individual organizations that have submitted information and to be able to formally empower the chair and the board to start that process of selection. It would be brought back to you for a formal approval, as well as I should note for the board, we will have to have additional conversation with the DC Public Charter School Board, and they will have to amend our charter, and we will be basically starting that process as well.
Thanks, Heather.
So this is Dr. Harris. I make a motion that we begin the process of the turnaround organization.
This is Susan. I'll second that motion to begin a process of identifying and negotiating a relationship with a turnaround organization.
All right, so we'll do another roll call. Susan Sabella.
I vote in favor.
Thank you. Austin Audiris. Audidis, I'm sorry.
Yes, I vote in favor.
Okay. Carrie Smith.
I voted in favor as well.
Altira Brown.
I vote in favor.
Dana Bogle.
I vote in favor.
Orinthia Harris.
I vote in favor also.
Chris Cody.
I vote in favor as well.
Okay, and I also vote in favor. Okay, so that concludes the voting session. Sorry about the screen. Heather, do you have any comments on what will take place next? I know you talked about it, but just to wrap up the session, do you have any comments?
Yeah, so the next, we'll have a few next steps just for all the members of the public as well. So the first will be that we will be preparing notice formally to Imagine. I'll be reaching out to Mr. Toller to talk about that process as well. That will be circulated to the board in terms of a formal letter. We'll be attaching tonight's vote and minutes of the meeting as well. The next then steps for all of our parents is I think there'll be some informational sessions, as I understand, on potential turnaround operators who are interested in coming into the school so that our parents and families understand the process and can feel confident that the school will continue in the fall and that there will be an educational program in place, and that we will be prepared as a board to deliver that. And then also we'll be engaging the DC Public Charter School Board. Our action and moving forward with a new turnaround operator will require a charter school amendment to our agreement. That's something that the charter school board has done several times with several other schools. So they're well versed in that process. And we will have to file and prepare and file a formal petition once we've selected or identified what turnaround operator we are interested in going with, presenting that information back to the DC Public Charter School Board. There will be a public meeting in which that's reviewed and where parents, families, and others have the opportunity to come and speak before the board. And then they will vote on that charter amendment, giving us formal approval. I think the goal is to have all of that timeline, wrapped up before the end of April, so that before the end of the new school year, we're able to share any decisions with parents and families and make them feel confident that they can return to the schools in the fall. So be a compressed timeline, but we'll be all working hard to make sure that happens, and also engaging with families.
Thank you, Heather. And just to add, I know there might be some concerns about the buildings. Are we still going to be in the building? Would you share a little bit about the lease? And before we talk about that, and I know staff members will also be concerned about, jobs. So imagine, staff technically, and but I would also say that, the same way that a relationship with Imagine occurred when contracts were renewed yearly, it's sort of the same way to look at this. It's not the end of the world. Contracts could have been renewed if things were otherwise or not renewed. So I don't want this to be taken to heart in a sense, because at least there's enough time to explore other options, or maybe whoever the turnaround organization is. I can't speak to how they would determine that, but I think I just wanted to say that we understand those sentiments, but the decision was done in the best interest of the students and in the best interest of the community at large, for the school and the families. So I'll just have Heather speak to that as well, and also the leases in terms of the buildings, what's going to happen, because we have a separate operating agreement and a separate lease, and the lease has actually kept us in a bind, especially with Lamond, at an $800,000 deficit, over $800,000 deficit each year, that we're stuck in. Actually, we've been stuck in quite a number of agreements with, and it's not to anyone here in particular, but with Imagine Schools. So it's been a long journey, and I'm glad that we're moving towards the right direction to do the best for the families in our community. So Heather, would you like to speak to
Yeah,
this?
I'd be happy to. So just for, members of the board and members of the public, we are currently in two different sublease agreements, both for the Tolson campus as well as the Lamond campus. Those leases run through June 30th of 2032. And we are in the process, and there's been conversation with some of the board of looking at those agreements, giving them, I think, a lot of scrutiny, which is something that our DC Public Charter School Board asked of this board as we looked at the operating agreement last year. We are, and I think this is not, necessarily unique to our school, but to many schools that started, several years back when there was, sort of a model by which schools could not get public financing for buildings, or could not get creditworthiness to be able to purchase or lease buildings. So they entered into agreements with organizations related to their management companies to be able to find those facilities. And we've seen that kind of across the country, and something that's similar here. So we have two different leases. Both of those subleases are in agreement with Schoolhouse Finance, which is a for-profit entity that is affiliated with Imagine Schools, but is a separate and distinct entity. They sit in the middle of our leases, and they have they hold an agreement with the master leaseholder, which for our Lamond campus is AEP, and for our Tolson campus is ESJ, or yes. So we know that ESJ, which is the master leaseholder for the Hope Tolson campus is in the process of selling those interests to AEP. So we will have a master landlord that is the same, once that deal is concluded. And we've been in some conversation to understand that that is moving forward. We are a little bit hamstrung from a board perspective because while we have a first right of offer to be able to buy out the interest of Schoolhouse Finance's leasehold interest, which is basically being able to remove them in the middle of the lease and become a tenant of the master landlord. There are some limitations on how we're able to exercise that option that do make it difficult for the school, including the master landlord having to agree to that, as well as Schoolhouse Finance having to be in a position where they're selling those interests. So we have no rights under the lease to be able to force them to sell those interests to us, and nor do we have any rights under the lease to be able to remove them from that middle. So we are in a lease. We will have buildings in the fall. Interestingly, in the agreements, the leases do not provide the school with any right to terminate absent Schoolhouse Finance's default. So we have no rights until the expiration date to be able to terminate the agreement, which is something we do want to talk with them about. That is a pretty strong provision, locking the school into those lease agreements. And I know that is a high concern for the board, particularly as we look at the operations and the cost. In addition, we've talked about some of the costs tonight. I know Mr. Martin's report was very thorough and I think gave me a lot of confidence that things are going to be ready for kids to come back to the classroom. However, those are expenses currently borne by the school in addition to the lease cost. So the way that the leases are set up, the master landlord has no obligations to make any additional changes for the school, whether it's related to COVID or just general building obligations. And Schoolhouse Finance also does not have those obligations. They've been passed down to the school through the sublease agreement. So a lot of concerns in terms of the layered cost in which we see related to these agreements. We are paying Schoolhouse Finance. Schoolhouse Finance is paying the master landlord. But all of the costs and expenses related to the building are falling to the school, and the leases themselves are above fair market value. So we're going to be pressing this issue. I think it's something that we want to make sure we have a good school facility, but the school itself financially, every dollar we're spending related to these leases are a dollar that we're taking out of classroom operations. And I know that is a concern of the board and one I share as well. So it is our goal that, once we have a single master leaseholder, that we begin to have, additional conversation about ways we can remedy some of these layered costs back to the school. So Madam Chair, I'll stop there and happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Attorney Harris. So do we have any questions? Comments? All right, so.
I just wanted to just clarify one thing. Heather, you were saying that that currently the leases extend for another 11 years. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay. Yeah, I was never able to really focus on the full extent of that. But yeah, okay, I think that's just a really important point. I think your analysis and presentation of the shortcomings of the lease arrangements for the school was really good. And I just hope everyone understands that it's just been a really difficult situation to function, fiscally soundly, with these leases. And it's just there are programmatic constraints presented by the buildings also, that teachers and school leaders are operating within. And anyway, thanks for doing that. It's helpful.
Yeah, I know that, I will share, many of you have been involved in conversations with the DC Public Charter School Board. I myself have had recent follow-up conversations with, members of their legal team. The number one thing they keep coming back to this school and to this board is that we've got to figure out a way to renegotiate these lease agreements. And DC does give a good level, a never perfect level, but a decent level of funding for facilities, which is more than many states that don't offer, facility funding to charter schools. But it is a concern when you're still taking general budget obligations and dollars from classrooms to pay facility leases that are, fairly antiquated in their structure in terms of passing all those costs back to the schools. So we're hopeful. I think, we've had some good conversation, and, again, we'll be reaching out to the master leaseholder. We've had some conversation there and with Schoolhouse Finance. So I'm hopeful we'll be able to revisit that for the board.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And another thing that's interesting, even, with the way the lease was set up, we've inherited all these things that we're trying to undo at this point. But the lease should not have been longer than the term of the operating agreement itself. Because if there's no school, why should the school still be stuck in a lease? So that shouldn't have even happened in the first place. But this has, this is before any of us here. So I think it's also important to highlight that, and we're doing our best to hold onto what we, just decided to do for the community, that we'll maintain our fiduciary responsibility and we'll do what's best for the students, for the families, for everyone. So I just want to use this opportunity to thank Imagine, to thank the staff here who are here today, who represent, the people who face the students every day. A lot of what we've discussed today is beyond so many of you here today. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of the board. Thank you, Mr. Toller. Thanks to everyone here. And we look forward to, working together to transition, to have a smooth transition. I think the word transition is very common today now in our world today, right? We hear that a lot everywhere, right? Let's ensure a smooth transition. So we won't have any insurrections or anything of that sort. I just thought I'd end this on a lighter note, but that's a big deal. But the idea is that we hope for a smooth transition with who or the entity that the board chooses or selects to serve as a turnaround organization. And we hope that we can count on Imagine for that smooth transition, because we are working in the best interest of the students and the entire community. So I just want to ask of that for everyone here, and to also say thank you for your service and your commitment. So a few other announcements as we close. Today will be Chris Cody's last meeting, and Orinthia Harris, well, Dr. O and Dr. C, I guess. And we just want to say thank you so much for your service. Thank you for everything that you've done for the board. Thanks for being here today to see us through this step of our journey. And we hope that we can still, count on you for support as we need or as needed. And we hope that you have Dr. O. I think Dr. Cody received his a couple of weeks ago. But just a token of our appreciation from the board has been sent as well. It's a plaque just to say thank you. Ideally, it would have been presented, if we were in person, but we just wanted to say thank you so much. And are there any comments from anyone else on the board just to say thank you to Chris and Orinthia?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to miss you guys. Yeah. I can't believe you're both going. But it's been great. It's been really great to know you personally, and you've just brought so much to the board. So thanks for your leadership.
Thank you.
I echo that. When I came in, and Dr. Cody was the board chair, and just his leadership, and Orinthia always being just amazing with her expertise as well on the Academic Excellence Committee. So thank you both.
Thank you, Dr. Cody and Dr. O. Thank you for helping me transition to be a member of the board. Thank you for your support and your leadership, and always willing to explain things. So I wish you the best in your future endeavors, and we will all hopefully stay in contact with each other as we go forward. So best of luck.
Yes, this is Alteria. Thank you guys. You also helped me with my transition, and I greatly appreciate it. And I wish you well. And again, thank you so much.
Anyone else? Any comments from Imagine or anyone, parents or anyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Madam Board Chair, if I will, thank you so much for, again, this space, and to the entire board. It's certainly been a pleasure working with you all. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I do admire your commitment to the children and the communities that you serve. So thank you all so very much. Dr. Harris, thank you for all that you've given to Imagine, as well as Dr. Cody. Thank you. It's certainly been a pleasure working with all of you, the entire board. And to you, Rebecca, Madam Board Chair, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you as well. And we do look forward to amicably collaborating with a smooth transition, working with Ms. Harris, the board attorney. Thank you so much. We will work definitely collaboratively with you, as well as the entire board, and also the incoming turnaround organization.
Thank you.
And this is Stephanie. If I may say something as well, I just want to thank both Imagine and the board. I know that the positions that Travis and I assume were birthed out of a need for the LEA, and also requested from the board. So I just want to again express my gratitude to be in this space at this time, even though it is one that is quite different than what I expected. It's been a true learning experience, and a lot gained from the leadership of both the board and the leaders of Imagine. So I just want to say thank you.
All right. So once again, thank you, everyone. This concludes our meeting. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn this meeting.
Okay.
I second it.
Okay, thank you. And before we officially do that, I just need one more motion to go into a closed session with the board regarding business matters pursuant to Section 2-575B of the Open Meetings Act.
I make a motion that we go into a closed session.
Okay.
And I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. I just need a roll call for that. And pardon me, it's just the process. So Susan, yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay. Austin?
Yay.
Carrie?
Yay.
Alteria?
Yay.
Dana? Dana? Okay. Orinthia?
Yes.
You made the motion. Yeah. Chris, you seconded
Yes.
the motion.
Yeah.
And
Dana Bogle, I'm Dana.
okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.